Okay, I believe recording is in place, so welcome everyone to, let's see if we move this over here, to an instance of office hours for the image builder, a sub-project of SIG cluster lifecycle. Just as a reminder, this meeting adheres to the Kubernetes Community Code of Conduct. Everyone be nice to each other. Just to start, put together a little bit of an agenda for today to talk about the image builder. If you don't have a link to this document, I can drop it in chat, and anybody can add anything to the agenda that they would like for sure. Let me drop a link to this in chat just in case. There we go. The first thing that I had on the list here was last week I got maintainer access to the repo, and I'm very interested in applying a beginning 0.1 tag. This has come up a bunch of times before. Moshe, you had no objections to tagging the repo. I just kind of wanted to confirm that. We don't really have anything in place about when the right time to do it is, but I think we're at a place where I have downstream consumers that want to be able to depend on something not changing. And it is very much a 0.1 state, but I think we're in a place where we can do that. Any thoughts
Yeah,
around that?
yeah, I'm happy with that.
Okay. You know, the thing that I always feel weird about it is, as you pointed out, there's multiple tools in the repo. There's the cluster API, you know, Packer-based builder. There's your config Atom stuff and the kube deploy stuff. So it's kind of weird to tag multiple projects without some coordination, but we got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to do a v0.1 this week. Might be today. And then I guess, you know, before I go to this, maybe I'll add to the agenda here. I want to make sure that we are able to allow other people to join, like Prakash to ask questions. Let's just say this is more like, say, group topics or questions, just so that we call it out on the agenda. One other thing that I wanted to ask you about, Moshe, was kind of following up on Tim St. Clair's ask around documentation and repo cleanup. I think he was concerned about two things. I think on my side, like the cluster API building thing, I think he wanted to see like a getting started guide added. The MD book stuff is in place, but we haven't linked to it from like the top level of README. So I was wondering if the right thing to do there would be at the top level README, call out the different projects, meaning, you know, whether it's the cluster API builder, the kube deploy stuff, whatever's happening there, link to their, you know, down into images folder path and link to their documentation or getting started. I think that's probably what I'll try to submit as a PR to kind of point people to the different projects so they understand what it actually is in the repo.
Yep, sounds good.
Because I know I'm confused about it if it's not the cluster API stuff. Like I don't know
Yeah,
anything about kube deploy or COPS or any of that kind of, or those various other projects. So like I'd like to put placeholders in there so someone who is knowledgeable about them can fill them in and help me out
yeah.
as well.
So,
No,
question here,
Please.
Mosh and Travis. I'm new to this. What is the image builder objective? What images does it build really?
Yeah, I can start with one part of it. So this image builder repo and project came about as an effort to consolidate multiple tools that have the goal of building images, node images for running a Kubernetes cluster. Some of those tools had different goals. And so, for example, one of them in there, and so like I can just kind of, let's do, since we're sharing, just if I go look at the, sorry, because of my screen share, I can't actually see my address bar. Anyway, and this is kind of what we're talking about exactly, is that the documentation doesn't really explain this very well, but there are a few different tools in here, and one of them is for building images for consumption by what we call CAPI or CAPI, which is the Cluster API project. And images built for Cluster API have a very specific goal of being able to be deployed, whether you're using a provider for Amazon, for Google, for DigitalOcean, for vSphere. And the images that we build and publish from that are considered to be immutable. So there's no package updates. Like we bundle up Kubernetes, a specific Kubernetes version and all the dependencies to run it and whatever you need. But the image is never supposed to be changed. If there's a package update that needs to happen, you have to build a new image. And that's kind of one of the foundational tenets of the Cluster API images. But other tools don't do it that way. There are other tools in here, and which is kind of what I was talking about with Moshe. There's this config Atom stuff that Moshe has been leading for a while, and this kube deploy project as well. And I'm not very knowledgeable about them. So how would we describe it, Moshe?
So immutability is the key factor in this, what Image Builder does, correct?
For the
go ahead.
Say for the Cluster API based images, yes, that there's nothing additional that needs to get installed, that there is an easy way for each provider to build images tailored for their needs or for the specific cloud provider. So for example, the providers that are supported in here right now are Amazon, so you build your AMIs, Azure, DigitalOcean, Google Compute, and OVA is for vSphere based infrastructure.
Is there anything for OpenStack here?
There is not.
Okay.
So the config admin tools actually work off of the upstream OpenStack images, or what the OS providers call the OpenStack images. So it downloads an OpenStack or the cloud image, does some work on that image, and then exports that out.
Okay, so config admin is the one. Is the config admin going to be included in this, or this is only for copy?
So config admin is not CAPI specific. So it is a general tool designed for configuring operating systems for Kubernetes use, which also makes it pretty easy for building images. So what's probably going to happen is that a little bit of the code that currently sits in config admin will go into what we're calling a CLI that will wrap all of these the different methods of building an image. So you're either building an image using Packer and spinning up an instance, or you're building an image using a local VM and doing it that way, and or using Ansible and or not using Ansible. So there's two kind of, well, three if you include kube deploy, which I think does a bit of custom. It's more similar to config admin in that it does some custom scripting and file movement and things like that.
So,
yeah.
So the question here is then, every cloud provider with their API, cluster API, will need some OS as well as some, what you call, metal or bare metal. So the bare metal is not included in this. What happens to Metal Cube in this case? Does it out of this,
so this is it's kind of been very much demand driven. So as people have a pressing demand and kind of downstream users who want a specific image for a specific cloud, somebody goes out and does the work and then adds it into here. So there's nothing stopping somebody from creating an OpenStack, a Packer build for OpenStack and submitting it into the CAPI folder, for example. That's exactly what the Azure folks did, for example. So the Amazon and the OVA were done a lot by Travis and team, And then the Azure images were done by Cecile Robert from Microsoft. I'm not sure who did the DigitalOcean one, but there's nothing stopping anybody who has a need for OpenStack for creating an OpenStack folder, doing whatever's necessary and committing it. The problem we do face today, however, is that nothing that's in here is actually tested or published, which is kind of where we want to move towards, is getting this work tested and published so that it's consumable from an image, not from a tool. So at the moment, if you want to build an image, you have to download or clone the repository and run the tooling to create your own image. Or I think some of the images have been pre-created and linked to, but that's very much an out-of-band process. It's not image builder proper.
Yeah, and that was the only thing I was going to add, is that some publish, but it is not automated. So the AMIs that are built with this tool are published publicly. The OVAs are published publicly, and they can be downloaded and used as they are. And they are not part of any automated testing framework. It's basically people using it and saying, yeah, it works. And if it doesn't, we hear back. So there isn't a lot of automated testing, but we do publish AMIs and OVAs regularly, but it is manual.
Manual is fine at this stage, but what I found interesting was MetalCube is doing its own, and that is metal3.io. They are doing their own images. So what is the difference in sense that if I have to install a cluster, and for that cluster I need hosts or instances, and those I need to create using bare metal, and then I have to install the OS, and then I have to partition them into whatever the pods, Kubernetes pods and clusters. So there is a whole slew of steps. So there is some assumption here in the image builder. What is that? What's the minimum requirement to build an image here? For a
So there is no minimum requirement or assumption. So I'm actually not familiar with what MetalCube is doing, but there's nothing stopping them from joining this meeting and adding their solution into the mix and or modifying what we have to make it suitable to run on bare metal. The only reason why this might not run on bare metal today is because nobody who's actively participating in the project has downstream users who are asking them to produce bare metal images. But there's nothing in the project roadmap or goals and non-goals that says bare metal is out of scope.
Yeah,
what's
I would
in
agree
scope
with.
is what
good. That's good to hear. So
yeah.
What I would like to find out, because see, image building is being done at different places, and if the expertise is going to be at a single place, which is what would help others to leverage.
So this is exactly the goal of the project, is that we want to try and consolidate the image building activities and then work to converge slowly over time onto a single path. And maybe, or it's 2 paths or 3 paths, but to kind of keep that image building functionality in one place so that we can at least try and extract the common bits and reuse common bits across all providers, all types of builds. And then only where the build kind of differs do we then say, okay, for this type of build, use bare metal building or whatever it is.
So based on your comments, I see there is scope for adding both OpenStack and MetalCube, 2 possible candidates for image building who possibly can participate here unless they have some reasons which I don't know. So what I would say is I would like to request those teams to see and engage here, at least to figure out if there is a possibility and what is that makes it difficult, or what problems they have that we can live with them, and how if they can leverage what exists.
Sounds good. If you want to reach out to those teams and
Yeah, I
try,
will reach out, because yesterday when I attended the cluster API, I don't know, there are many meetings of that. One of them
Yes, there.
probably was office hours or something. And then I was referred here that, hey, if you have problems for image, why not attend this? And so I came here searching for, is there anything that I can leverage from this for what we need in Metal Cube? And although I don't drive the Metal Cube, I am part of the Airship team in open infrastructure, where we needed a couple of things which were handicapped, which were basically short of resources. And so if I could leverage somebody from there to bring here and have commonality, so we can reduce our workload, etc. So it's an optimization possible opportunity I'm trying to look at.
Yep.
Hopefully that explains my jumping into this call.
Yeah, no, I'm
sounds
very
good.
happy to have you for sure. And as you can tell by the number of attendees on this call, there's not a lot of additional contribution happening right now. So anybody, like Moshe said, it's very demand driven. Someone
Correct.
needs to create images for a particular provider. Every provider right now is some type of cloud provider or virtualization provider. So there hasn't been anybody who is contributing a bare metal implementation.
Yeah, so this is where I will look into bare metal, how, why, etc. There is a Quay or something, they have an image library, I believe, where they deposit all that. And so I want to find out from that team and the Airship team, can we leverage this as you have a repo, right? Where you deposit your images and all, or is it external to it?
The location of the images is external. The repo is the tooling for building, but and as Moshe explained, there's nothing automated right now to publish images, but the documentation for the various providers should list out where they are. I say should, meaning that I can check.
Although we are planning on publishing them somewhere, so at least for the config admin images, I actually have another repo.
What about the cloud
repo.
init? What about the cloud init there? Does it refer to anything to OpenStack, or is it?
There's nothing related to OpenStack in here right now, I don't think.
So do you use cloud init here in your image building process somewhere?
So I think the OVAs on the CAPI are very much vSphere specific.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
I think they are tied to the vSphere cloud init provider.
Okay.
But the config admin images shouldn't be tied to the vSphere provider at all. And I actually want to try publishing them on GitHub itself. So creating a release on GitHub and attaching those images as artifacts to the release. I don't know what you think of that, Travis.
Anything that we can tie in with GitHub usually tends to be a little bit easier. So yeah, I'd be up for trying that.
That's right.
And
sorry.
Say again?
No, the one which is related to Ansible, that's different, because the Airship team which is working on, they use Go. So I don't know how the Go language will libraries will fit into this.
So config admin is a Golang tool essentially that was built after very many hours, days, and months of pulling out hair while using Ansible. So it's designed to be a lightweight replacement to Ansible, purely for building Kubernetes images. If that,
so are you saying that it is easier to do with Go here than
So if you wanted to integrate at a Go level and or use some of the code, some of the config admin code, especially from Go, that's what it's designed for.
Okay.
So the config admin tool, what it does essentially is that you give it a spec, and it takes that spec and applies a whole bunch of transformations to it that will then spit out a set of bash commands and files to save, which is then created in a cloud init file or run directly. So it's designed to be very, very generic at a base layer. So give it a spec, apply transformations, and then emit some commands and the files that can then be tested as well using unit testing.
I see. So I think I'll have to go through the whole thing before I can really contribute on anything. But at least let me review it and see if I can get some people to help us out more. Because on my own, I don't think I will be able to do it fully, because it's a little bit more complex than on documentation side. Yes, I can do it. On coding side, I'll have to take support from some of the people and find out if there is any synergy, and can they help us in one on the OpenStack and other on the Metal Cube, trying to bring this as part of the common image builder. So those are the, so I will investigate this and certainly like to see something happening here, because it's quite complex for me to understand the whole process, because there are multiple layers here. Metal Cube has its own, Ionic has its own, then Cluster API has its own, and Bare Metal Operator has its own. So a bit more complex than I can understand, my level of understanding. But I'll try to coordinate and see if I can bring something to the table. To
if you look at that config admin images repo, there are a bunch of images that have been published there. I've been kind of using that as a testing ground that will come into this repo. So now that we have GCP infrastructure available for building the images, that config admin images repo will merge into this one, and we should be able to get some images published for whatever provider is available.
Fantastic. That's super. That helps. Yeah, you can continue. I have asked my questions. I'll let you move further.
Yeah, there's not much else. So yeah, I mean, thank you for coming and asking. And yeah, if you can find.
There was one more person who wanted to attend. I don't know who it was, but I didn't.
Justin St. Barbary is from kubedeploy and KOps.
Oh, okay. So
let's hope he joins up. I know he had another meeting, but he said he would try joining the last half of the call.
Yeah, last half of the call. So exactly. So that is what I was waiting for him. So shall we wait for him? Last half of the call has come now. Hopefully he can join.
Yeah. We'll see if he shows.
Yeah, unless he comes, we cannot do anything. So maybe you can explain me the whole process. One, in the meantime, while we hope he'll come join us in another 5-10 minutes. If you can explain me what goes into image building fundamentally.
It depends on the tool.
So let's take one tool. Let's go through the tool you have. One tool you taken. You explain me what is on config admin image building. Is that if you have expertise on that, or whatever? Choose me one flow of image building. So if I have to build an image, I need to first have some YAML file or some JSON file with the packages or manifest and packages. What's it we need to do to get an image?
Well, maybe we can circle back to that, because Justin did just join, and so I wanted to make sure that we can cover the kube deploy stuff or anything around that. and then we can jump back to that. Prakash, would you be okay
Yeah,
with that?
yeah, I think Justin has joined. Well, welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks. I will keep quiet now. Yeah, listen.
Okay. I'm actually, Moshe, I'll ask you to figure out where to go next, because yeah, I think you had something to discuss with Justin, and I'm not sure I know what it is. So
Yeah, so thanks, Justin, for joining us. So it's really around kube deploy and where it's headed, and does it make sense to start trying to merge that into config admin, and kind of what were your thoughts on the GCP building of images using nested virtualization? So quite a handful.
To be honest, I haven't looked at where config Adam idiom landed up. How do you? What's the correct pronunciation?
Config admin, kube admin.
Okay. Config cuddle landed.
So basically, previously it was just a side project of mine, but I actually just started a company called FlankSource. So it's been moved to the FlankSource repository, and I'm going to be spinning up some more resources to kind of contribute, not just to config admin, but to hopefully image builder as well, so we can get a bit more support into it. That's kind of my goal at the moment. And then at the same time, it is CNCF licensed if we wanted to bring it into this repo part and parcel as well.
So I have a question for you there, Moshe. You said it's been moved into the FlankSource repository. We do still have this config Adam directory within the repo. Is that something?
There's two, so I've kind of split it in two. So the first is creating a config admin binary, and that binary is the tool config admin, and then there's the specs and manifests that will refer to a specific version of the binary and manifest. So whether that's the right approach or not, I don't know, but it's kind of the approach that I've found that works. So even now there's a FlankSource config admin repo that does integration testing using Docker containers. So it will spin up a Docker systemd container, install Kubernetes and all the dependencies, run some tests on it and spin it back down. After it's done with that, it produces a binary. And I can do that across like 5 or 6 different operating systems. So there's quite a bit of unit testing and integration testing built into that directly. Then once that produces a binary, you can then go and select a specific version of Kubernetes and a specific version of Docker or Containerd and configure an image and then publish an image. So it's just a question of how we split it.
Yeah, I guess I'm still confused then on what we would expect to be in this folder, in this repo. Like,
so these would be, if you look at any one of those files, these are the specs that define what goes into the image. So what this spec says is deploy all the dependencies of Kubernetes, deploy all the dependencies for Docker, and run kubeadmin config images pool. And then do a cleanup of that image so that it's template ready. So that at its core, and then what that will do is it'll then split that out into a whole bunch of packages, package repos that it needs to install, a whole bunch of commands it needs to run, and then it does that. And it will either do that inline, so you can go config admin apply with a spec, and it will actually create the files and run the commands for you. Or you can go config admin images build, which will download a cloud image file, spin it up using KVM with the cloud init already created. As that image spins up, it runs all the cloud init and then shuts itself down. and then you have a baked image essentially. So there's no
Gotcha.
there's no Ansible involved. There's no SSH involved. Any of that.
Okay, thanks for explaining that.
But this needs to be in the public, right? That means this cannot be done in lab environment with VPN and all. It should be is that what the expectation is?
So all config admin requires is KVM or nested virtualization. If you're building an image, if you just want to test the configuration that config admin uses, then you can run that on you just download the binary and run it with a spec, and it will apply it on that operating system and do whatever it needs to do. But I run it on a Mac or on Circle CI and nested virtualization. So the number of dependencies that it requires is just the binary and KVM. It actually produces a Docker image as well that has some of the stuff for OVF building and OVA conversion, that type of thing as well.
Okay.
So circling back, it sounds then like the next question there is like, where does this fit into kubedeploy, if at all, or like what the state of kubedeploy is? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so that's kind of my question.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for the background. And so kubedeploy is still used to build I guess the default images that COPS runs with, for example. They're now increasingly close to, they used to be much more back in the days, they used to be much more sort of complicated in terms of the changes we made based on the upstream. And now the upstream is basically just a stock Debian, I see if I get this right, Debian stretch. And we add some packages to that, primarily Docker, and basically pre-installing. Now, Bionic is now out, and so we do want to create a Bionic image now that Kubernetes supports it, and so perhaps Bionic could be the opportunity to evaluate whether we can switch to use config ADM, and maybe, I don't know if that seems like a good approach, Moshe.
Yeah, is that maybe something that we should do in the KOps office hours? Or here, how would you like to tackle it?
I mean, I think, honestly, we don't even have an image yet. So we just need to, like, let's see if we can create the image based on Bionic that basically has the same set of changes that is in the, like, if we go into the kubedeploy repo, or the kubedeploy subdirectory, most of the changes are isolated to like a script. So I don't know if you can click around. Sorry, images, kubedeploy, and then image builder, and then templates. And then if we look at like 115 stretch.yml, you can see that like pretty much not a lot going on. And then we have like a bunch of packages we pre-install that are important, and like some cloud init tweaks, and some like installing the AWS CLI, and like doing a bunch of stuff, and like making sure we can boot, things like that. But this seems very compatible with what you have, the syntax I saw, right? Where effectively you run some commands. So we just like, I guess that what we should evaluate is, can we effectively translate this logic to the extent that it applies between Stretch and Bionic? Can we just translate that to a config ADM build and create an image that works, and then we could be like all unified behind this?
Okay.
Is there another tool, or is everyone using config ADM?
Well, so there's a config ADM, and then there's the Packer plus Ansible combination.
Okay, so we also need to bring them into the fold. right?
Yes, so Travis has kind of been taking the lead on the Packer plus Ansible
Cool.
combo.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by bring us into the fold?
In the same way that we don't want kubedeploy to be like a different thing, like we should probably try to have like one, unless there's a valid reason to, like in general, we should not have different solutions for the sake of it, but we should try to have like more consistency if we can. So like
yeah,
figure
definitely agree. And I think earlier we were talking about kind of like why this project exists, and that is the main reason was to try and eventually converge on a single tool.
And I believe we believe that config ADM is the one where we would like to converge into. So yeah, I'm certainly happy to try.
So I don't know if we've decided on that. So that's definitely my opinion, but I think there are many opinions out there. I think the Packer plus Ansible is definitely much more, not battle tested. It's much more, maybe battle tested is a better word. But I think the idea was
maybe like
more deployed, it's more widespread. But I think what we wanted to do was, so there's also a CLI that we're building that will wrap the Packer and Ansible combination. And then that same CLI will wrap the config admin configuration. We set up the automated pipelines and the automated testing so that we can produce images from both. And then we kind of iterate on that and try and bring the changes that are common down and to make them common, and then make the solutions extensible so that if I want to use Ansible to post-configure my image, I can use Ansible to post-configure my image. And if I want to start with an existing AWS VM, I can start with an existing AWS VM and configure it for Kubernetes, and I can do that. Once we have all of those combinations kind of in place with a pipeline, we can then start seeing which is more easy to use, which is green more often, which makes more sense to go forward with. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
Cool.
So Moshe, kind of framing this into Tim St. Clair's ask of cleaning this up, and by this I mean the repo, like it still sounds to me like all the projects that are there have a purpose. And while, I mean, we can't, he was asking us to like carve things out or move them a little bit deeper so they weren't as, I think, right in your face, right as public if there was a project that wasn't being actively used. But I'm still hearing that they kind of are, even if it's very niche.
So I think we can all agree that nobody new should start using the kubedeploy solution. So if you're a newcomer out there, you should probably pick either the CAPI, Packer plus Ansible, or the config admin, seeing as kubedeploy will converge into one or the other of those.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. I'd say like I would expect that I will have some pull requests that go like that. There will be that when we try Bionic, we will find some things that we would like to enhance or add to config ADM. Packer in the past has proved not the right approach from a reproducibility point of view type thing for us.
Yeah, so I think we're always going to have that situation where some people prefer building locally and some prefer spinning up a VM. So I think we do need to support both. But I think once we have both general ways of building an image, we should try and converge as much as possible on the actual bits that go onto it and make those as common as possible.
So it's a packaging which is common, right, for both, whether you do through VM or through container.
Yes and no. The CAPI packaging specifically, I don't think it has a support for Docker at the moment, and the container D is installed as a binary. And there are some issues with that. So they're not common even at that level at this point, and I think we need to make them common at that level, so that if I choose container D, whether I'm using Packer or whether I'm using config admin to produce my image, I get the same container D bits on disk, and the same container D, whether if I'm on a Debian system that was produced out of this project, the container D will be installed and configured the same way. So that's what I would like to see.
So at the specs level also we cannot have commonality. At the specs level you can have commonality, right? After that, what we use, what we produce may be different.
No. So we want to have commonality in the specs. So if I choose a version of container D, whether I'm building via a VM or whether I'm building via KVM and bits on disk, I should get the same output at the end. They should look the same. I shouldn't be able to distinguish the two. At the moment, I can distinguish the two because the one is installed via a package repository and the other is installed via binary downloaded from a server somewhere. So that is something that we want to converge.
I see.
And all of those bits we want to converge, so that we making the differences being whether I'm building via Packer and a VM or whether I'm building locally using KVM.
I see. Makes sense.
Cool.
I know I don't have anything else. Did you get your questions answered, Moshe and Prakash?
Yeah, I got answers, but I'll have to still study and make sure that I approach MetalCube image builders team and see how they can bring into this. And the other one is, of course, the OpenStack, which I'm looking at is as a cloud. Does it have anything, and can anybody bring any value here? So that we have everything at a single point. Otherwise, it's very hard to trace where, what, when, how. So I'm with you all. I will try what best I can to bring people here to coordinate. And since yesterday, Jason, we had in the, I think, what was that cluster API meeting? I don't remember. Was it where I came for the probably first or second time? So I'm not very conversant still with the Kubernetes way of doing things, trying to learn and see if I can coordinate a couple of things from OpenStack side of it.
So the meeting that you had yesterday, that was the cluster lifecycle office hours that happens every 2 weeks. And that's for all of the sub-projects of cluster lifecycle. And then there was a meeting just before this one, which was cluster API, that happens every week. And then this meeting is the image builder office hours, and this one happens every 2 weeks.
Confused yet? But as Moshe said,
I'm learning, but I did see that value for image is important for us because that's the deployment point for us. Even whether I do Redfish, whether I do otherwise cloud init. So, and for all the clouds basically, not just one cloud. So it's a good place to gather. Where can I get an image? How can I bring people to produce image? And if we can standardize the process, that will be super, but it will take time, I know. And until then, we'll have to see how we can maintain the tempo on this.
One ask I would have for you, Prakash, is as you are, you said, kind of studying this and everything, we realize that a lot of our documentation is inadequate. So
Mhm.
please feel free to file issues and say, I don't understand this and why isn't it documented?
Oh,
Yeah.
that'll be super. Yeah, I'll do that.
And,
I'll
and
definitely.
call out what's missing for sure.
Sure,
Um,
I'll do that. I'll do that.
okay.
That contribution I can take. Thanks.
And then one other thing I just wanted to ask, since Justin was on the call, is we do have a couple of PRs that have been around for a while that look fine, but I know personally I was not okay / approving them because they touched parts of the project I'm not familiar with. I don't know if you or anyone on your team who is familiar more with, like, you know, the COPS and Cube Deploy stuff is happy to look at it. Like, I mean, the GoLint error is just dead simple. Like, I should just / approve it. Like, I know it fixes it. But still, we'd kind of been taking, like, I only kind of understand the stuff that's under the cluster API folder. And while I'm happy to LGTM stuff, there's a couple things that are looking for approves that no one wanted to take responsibility for.
Thank you for the pointer, and I appreciate that. And I will take a go at it.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, final call for any other group topics or anything that anyone wants to bring up.
No,
There is actually one issue, number 158. Ensure the SSM agent is installed and running in AWS images.
Yeah, I got okay.
So, like, while I understand why somebody wants this, at the same time, I think doing it by default is a little bit dangerous.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things where we've added similar things, we've made it a flag. And so, yeah, I think enabling it sounds fine, and it sounds like there's a discussion of whether it should be there by default.
Okay.
No, I mean, and I guess what I'm saying is I completely agree with you. And I'm not an expert on this area, and I'm not familiar with the SSM agent.
It's basically an approved backdoor.
So I don't know what the risks of putting that in are by default. So I would, I guess I would just encourage you to, I just do encourage you to add your feedback there in the issue and say, hey, yeah, this is great, but let's make it optional.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Sounds
see what
good.
folks say. Okay.
Cool.
All right. I'm gonna try and channel my inner Tim St. Clair. Going once, going twice, 3 times.
Solved.
All right. Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining, Justin.
Thanks.
And welcome, Prakash. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.